The Council's ultimatum, the central assembly hall of the Galactic Council, floated in the void between star systems, a massive structure built from materials harvested across 1,000 worlds. Inside its primary chamber, representatives from 184 civilized species gathered in their designated sections, each area modified to accommodate the specific environmental needs of its occupants. Some breathed nitrogen, others existed as energy patterns contained in magnetic fields, and a few required complete darkness to survive. The technology that allowed such diversity to coexist in one space represented thousands of years of advancement. Ambassador David Richardson walked across the polished floor toward the speaking platform, his footsteps echoing in the enormous space. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a face that showed the stress of representing humanity for the past decade. His simple gray diplomatic suit looked unremarkable compared to the elaborate displays surrounding him, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. Behind him, 2 junior diplomats followed, carrying data tablets containing humanity's legal documentation. They had spent months preparing for this moment, building what they believed was an airtight case. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 73 years ago, after achieving faster-than-light travel and making first contact with the Relian Confederacy. In the decades since, humans had spread to 42 colony worlds, always following Council protocols, always filing proper claims, always respecting established boundaries. They had paid their dues literally and figuratively, contributing to Council programs and participating in diplomatic initiatives. They had earned their place among the stars through careful adherence to every rule. Now all of that was being called into question. Richardson reached the platform and activated the holographic display. Images appeared in the air above him, showing 3 human colonies: New Horizon, Terra Nova, and Last Hope. These worlds had been surveyed by human ships, claimed through proper Council channels, and developed over 25 years. 2 million humans called these planets home. They had built cities, farms, schools, and lives there. These were not temporary mining operations or research outposts. These were permanent settlements where children were born, where families lived and died, where a new branch of humanity was taking root. Honored Council members, Richardson began, his voice amplified to reach every section of the chamber. Humanity presents its case regarding the territorial dispute in the Andromeda sector. The 3 colonies in question were claimed according to Section 47 of Council territorial law. We conducted thorough surveys. We found no evidence of prior claims. We filed all documentation with the territorial registry. We waited the required verification period. We received approval from the Council's own administrative body. Only then did we begin settlement. He paused, letting his words be translated into the hundreds of languages and communication methods used by Council species. The translation systems worked instantly, but Richardson had learned to give listeners time to process the information. We have brought complete records, Richardson continued, survey data, registry confirmations, environmental impact assessments, population manifests. Everything required by Council law. Humanity has broken no rules. We have violated no treaties. We ask the Council to recognize our legal rights to these colonies. From the elevated section reserved for the Vorath Empire, a massive figure rose. Commander Zethus stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in dark purple scales that reflected the chamber's lighting. The Vorath were an ancient species, one of the first to achieve interstellar travel, and they had never let younger species forget it. Zethus wore the traditional armor of a Vorath military commander, each piece engraved with symbols representing centuries of conquest and expansion. The human presence documents, Zethus said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor, but documents do not overwrite history. The Vorath Empire controlled the Andromeda sector 4,000 years ago. Our ancestors established waypoints on those very worlds. They are part of our historical territory. The presence of human colonists on those worlds is an insult to Vorath heritage. Richardson had expected this argument, but hearing it stated so bluntly still made his jaw tighten. Commander Zethus, with respect, passing through a region 4,000 years ago does not constitute a territorial claim under current Council law. If it did, the Vorath could claim ownership of half the known galaxy. The law exists to prevent exactly this kind of retroactive claim. You lecture us on law? Zethus's scales darkened with anger. Humanity has been among the stars for less than a century. The Vorath Empire has maintained order in this galaxy for 5,000 years. You are children playing with toys you barely understand, claiming you have the same rights as civilizations that mastered space travel, when your species was still living in caves. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some species made sounds of agreement. Others remained silent, watching carefully. Richardson noticed that several of the younger council members, species who had joined within the last few centuries, looked uncomfortable. They understood that this case could set a precedent that might affect them as well. The chief arbiter, a crystalline being named Crystallix who existed as a consciousness within a lattice of living mineral, raised one glowing appendage for silence. Crystallix had served as chief arbiter for 200 years and was considered one of the most impartial beings in the galaxy. Many species trusted Crystallix to interpret council law fairly. Ambassador Richardson, Crystallix's voice resonated through specialized speakers that translated their mineral vibrations into sound. Your documentation is indeed in order. However, Commander Zethus raises a point that the Council must consider. The Vorath Empire's historical connection to the Andromeda sector is well documented. This Council has always respected the cultural and historical significance of territories to its member species. Richardson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Chief Arbiter, are you saying that historical significance overrides legal documentation? That a species can simply claim territory thousands of years after abandoning it, even when another species has legally settled there? I am saying that the Council must balance multiple considerations, Crystallix replied. Law is important, but so is the preservation of cultural heritage and the maintenance of harmonious relations between species. In other words, Richardson said quietly, might makes right. The Vorath want the colonies, and because they are powerful, the Council will give them what they want. The chamber erupted in angry sounds from multiple species. Zethus roared something in the Vorath language that the translators rendered as a threat. Other species shouted objections to Richardson's characterization, but some remained silent, and their silence spoke volumes. Crystallix called for order, and eventually the chamber quieted. The Council will vote on this matter. The resolution before us is as follows. The human colonies of New Horizon, Terra Nova, and Last Hope will be transferred to Vorath control. Humanity will evacuate all colonists within 60 standard days. The Vorath Empire will compensate humanity for infrastructure costs at a rate to be determined. Humanity will also pay reparations to the Vorath Empire for cultural offense in the amount of 800 billion credits. Richardson stared at Crystallix in disbelief. 800 billion credits? That would bankrupt our colonial development program for a generation. And you expect us to simply abandon 2 million people? To tell them their homes, their lives, mean nothing because an empire that hasn't visited those worlds in 4,000 years has decided they want them? The vote will proceed, Crystallix said. Richardson watched as the voting indicators appeared throughout the chamber. Green lights for yes, red lights for no, yellow lights for abstention. The lights began to activate. Green, green, green. The older, more powerful species voted to support the Vorath. Some younger species voted red, but not enough. Some abstained, unwilling to stand against the Vorath, but also uncomfortable with the precedent being set. The final count appeared on the main display. 127 in favor, 31 against, 26 abstentions. The resolution passes, Crystallix announced. Humanity has 60 standard days to evacuate the disputed colonies. Failure to comply will result in council enforcement action. Richardson stood motionless for a long moment. He had known this might happen, but some part of him had hoped that the law would matter, that the principles the council claimed to uphold would mean something. Now he understood the truth. The council was not a government of laws. It was an arrangement between powerful species that occasionally tolerated weaker ones. Ambassador Richardson, Crystallix said, do you acknowledge the council's decision? Richardson looked up at the crystalline being, then let his gaze sweep across the chamber, studying the faces and forms of the species that had just voted to destroy human colonies. Some looked satisfied, some looked uncomfortable. A few appeared sympathetic but had voted yes anyway. I acknowledge that the council has made its decision, Richardson said slowly. But I want every species in this chamber to understand something. Humanity followed your laws. We did everything right. We played by your rules, and you betrayed us anyway because we don't have enough power to make you afraid. You taught us that laws only protect those strong enough to enforce them. You are dismissed, Zethis said with evident satisfaction. Richardson turned and walked toward the exit, his junior diplomats following. Behind him, the council was already moving to its next agenda item, as if the fate of 2 million humans was just a minor inconvenience to be resolved and forgotten. The journey back to Earth took 8 days through the council's faster-than-light transit network. Richardson spent most of that time in his quarters, reviewing the council session recording and writing his report. He also spent time composing messages to the colonial governors on New Horizon, Terra Nova, and Last Hope. How did you tell 2 million people that their homes were being taken away? How did you explain that their lives were worth less than the pride of an alien empire? When his ship emerged from FTL travel near Earth, Richardson looked out the viewport at the blue and green world that had given birth to humanity. It looked peaceful, beautiful, innocent of the forces gathering against it. But Richardson knew that peace was about to end. The meeting of Earth's unified government took place in Geneva, in a secure facility built deep inside an alpine mountain. President Maria Santos of South America, Chancellor James O'Brien of North America, Premier Wei Zhang of Asia, and representatives from every major political bloc on Earth gathered around a circular table. Holographic displays showed the 3 colonies in question, along with detailed reports on the council vote. Richardson presented his findings, leaving nothing out. When he finished, silence filled the room. President Santos spoke first. 800 billion credits. That's more than our entire annual budget for off-world development. If we pay that, we'll have to shut down colony support for a decade. And if we evacuate 2 million people, Premier Zhang added, where do they go? Back to Earth? We don't have the infrastructure to absorb that many returnees. And psychologically, telling 2 million colonists they have to abandon their homes, it would devastate morale across all our colonies. Chancellor O'Brien leaned forward. Let's address the real question. What happens if we refuse? Admiral Karen Vasquez, commander of Earth's Space Defense Force, activated another holographic display. It showed star charts with force projections. The Vorath Empire has approximately 4,000 warships. The Council as a whole has over 50,000. Earth's Space Defense Force has 347 ships. If they decide to enforce this by military action, we can't win a conventional war. Can't win or we'll definitely lose, President Santos asked. Admiral Vasquez was a career military officer who had spent 40 years in space. She had fought in the resource wars between Mars colonies and the asteroid belt miners. She had commanded peacekeeping missions in the outer system. She knew warfare in space better than almost anyone alive. If they send their full fleet, we will definitely lose. But wars aren't always decided by numbers, and I think we can make them pay a price they're not expecting. You're talking about fighting the entire Galactic Council, Premier Zhang said. That's insane. Yes, Admiral Vasquez agreed. But consider the alternative. If we surrender now, we establish a precedent. We tell every species in the galaxy that humans will back down when threatened. We tell our own colonists that we won't protect them. We tell our children that humanity's word, humanity's legal rights, humanity's entire future among the stars means nothing when faced with force. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood the weight of the decision they faced. If we fight and lose, Chancellor O'Brien said quietly, Earth itself could be threatened. Earth is already threatened, Richardson said. Maybe not militarily, not yet. But politically, economically, we're being told that we're second-class members of the galactic community. If we accept that now, we'll be accepting it forever. President Santos looked around the table, studying each face. I want to hear from everyone. Should humanity surrender or should we resist? The debate lasted 14 hours. Arguments were made for negotiation, for trying to buy more time, for attempting to split the council by appealing to sympathetic species. But ultimately, the vote came down to a simple question. Would humanity stand up for its principles or would it bow to force? The final vote was close, but the decision was made. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not abandon its colonies. Earth would not pay reparations for a crime it did not commit. If the Council wanted those colonies, they would have to take them. Admiral Vasquez immediately activated Earth's emergency protocols. Ships in orbit received orders to prepare for combat operations. Colonial defense forces on New Horizon, Terra Nova, and Last Hope were alerted. Military production facilities on Mars and Luna went to maximum output. Scientists working on experimental weapons programs found their projects suddenly well-funded and given highest priority. And throughout human space, from Earth to the furthest colony, a message spread through every communication network. Humanity was drawing a line. The galaxy could respect it, or the galaxy could learn why humans had survived and thrived on one of the most dangerous planets in the known universe. 3 weeks later, sensors detected a Vorath fleet emerging from FTL at the edge of human space. 60 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had built. They moved in perfect formation toward New Horizon, expecting to find a defenseless colony ready to surrender. They were about to discover their first mistake. Admiral Vasquez sat in the command center under the Alps, watching real-time data transmitted from New Horizon. The colony's defensive coordinator, a former Earth military officer named Colonel Marcus Chen, had spent the past 3 weeks preparing. Vorath fleet is entering weapons range, the communications officer reported. They're broadcasting surrender demands. Tell Colonel Chen he's authorized to respond, Vasquez said calmly. On New Horizon, Colonel Chen stood in the colony's command bunker, surrounded by screens showing the approaching Vorath fleet. His defense force consisted of 12 small patrol ships and a handful of orbital weapons platforms. Against 60 Vorath warships, it should have been no contest. Chen opened a communication channel to the Vorath fleet. The face of a Vorath commander appeared on his screen. Human commander, the Vorath said. This is Fleet Commander Rothak. You have been ordered to surrender this colony. Evacuate your personnel immediately, or we will remove you by force. Chen looked at the Vorath commander for a long moment, then smiled. Commander Rothak, let me tell you something about humans. We're from a planet where almost everything tried to kill us. Predators, diseases, weather, other humans. We learned to survive by being meaner, smarter, and more stubborn than anything else on Earth. You think 60 ships scares us? Come and find out what happens when you threaten our homes. The channel went dead. Rothak stared at his screen in disbelief, then rage. They dare refuse? Forward ships target their orbital platforms. Destroy them. The Vorath fleet advanced, weapons charging. Their tactical displays showed the human defenses. Weak, outnumbered, insignificant. What their displays didn't show were the mines. Hundreds of them, drifting among the orbital debris, their signatures masked by stealth technology that humanity had spent decades perfecting. Human engineers had studied Vorath sensors and found their weaknesses, designing mines that were invisible until it was too late. The first Vorath ship crossed into the minefield. The explosion lit up space like a miniature sun. The warship's shields absorbed most of the blast, but the ship was knocked off course, its systems temporarily disrupted. Then the second mine detonated, and the third, and suddenly the Vorath formation was falling apart as captains tried to avoid the invisible threats. Evasive maneuvers, Rothak ordered. Get us out of this debris field. But the mines weren't in a debris field. They were everywhere, and they were mobile, using tiny thrusters to adjust their positions to chase their targets. Vorath ships scattered, breaking formation, and that's when Chen launched his real attack. The 12 human patrol ships came screaming out of the planet's shadow, their engines pushed beyond safe limits. They didn't try to engage the Vorath fleet in conventional combat. Instead, each ship targeted a specific Vorath vessel, firing everything they had at point-blank range before veering away. Human weapons were different. While most species used energy beams that shields could partially deflect, humans used kinetic weapons. Chunks of metal accelerated to incredible velocities. The Vorath shields, designed to dissipate energy, were less effective against physical projectiles. The human attack ships raked across Vorath hulls, their railguns punching through armor, their missiles exploding inside enemy ships. 3 Vorath warships died in the first 30 seconds. 5 more were damaged. The rest finally got organized and returned fire, but the human ships were already gone, diving back toward the planet's atmosphere where the larger Vorath vessels couldn't easily follow. Rothak watched his tactical display in stunned disbelief. He had lost 3 ships and hadn't destroyed a single human vessel. His fleet outnumbered the humans 6-1, and somehow they were losing. Regroup, Rothak ordered. Reform the battle line. We'll bombard the planet from range. But before his fleet could organize, the orbital weapons platforms activated. They weren't traditional weapons. Humanity had taken a page from its own history, from the first space program centuries ago. The platforms were electromagnetic launchers, railguns on a massive scale. They accelerated containers full of ball bearings to extraordinary velocities and fired them at the Vorath fleet. The Vorath shields could stop energy beams. They could even handle some kinetic weapons, but they couldn't stop thousands of small projectiles traveling at orbital velocities. The ball bearings tore through shields like they weren't there, shredding hulls, destroying sensors, killing crew members. 2 more Vorath ships died. 4 more were crippled so badly they had to retreat. The Battle of New Horizon lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Vorath fleet had withdrawn, leaving behind 12 destroyed warships and 17 damaged ones. The human defenders had lost 3 patrol ships and 2 orbital platforms. The casualty ratio was completely unexpected. News of the battle spread through the Galactic Council faster than light. Species that had voted to give the colonies to the Vorath suddenly found themselves questioning that decision. The humans hadn't just fought back. They had won. In the council chambers, Commander Zethus stood before the assembled species, his scales dark with rage and humiliation. The humans used treacherous tactics. They fought without honor. They must be punished. But other voices were joining the conversation now. Species that had remained neutral or abstained from the vote were speaking up. The humans defended their legal territory, said Ambassador Tillian of the Relian Confederacy. They used tactics appropriate to their situation. There is no dishonor in defending one's home. They destroyed Vorath warships, Zethus roared. The Vorath attacked first, Tillian replied calmly. What did you expect them to do? The council was fracturing and everyone could see it. The vote that had seemed so certain 3 weeks ago was now looking like a terrible mistake. On Earth, Admiral Vasquez watched the reports coming in from across human space. The Vorath weren't giving up. They were assembling a larger fleet, calling in allies, preparing for a second attack. The real war was just beginning, but humanity had proven something important. They had shown the galaxy that humans wouldn't surrender easily. They had demonstrated that even a numerically inferior force could win if it fought smart. The message was spreading through human colonies, through Earth's military, through the civilian population. Humanity had stood up to the galactic powers and survived the first battle. Now came the hard part, surviving the next one. The price of underestimating humanity. The Vorath War Council met on their homeworld of Vorathis Prime, in a chamber carved from obsidian stone that had witnessed 5,000 years of military planning. 20 high commanders sat in a circle around a holographic display showing the Andromeda sector. The display was marked with red indicators showing Vorath losses at New Horizon. The numbers were embarrassing. Supreme Commander Velkor, the highest military authority in the Vorath Empire, stood at the center of the circle. His scales were decorated with symbols representing 3 centuries of service and countless victories. He had personally commanded fleets in 17 campaigns and never lost a single engagement. The defeat at New Horizon was a stain on his perfect record, and it burned in his mind like acid. Explain to me, Velkor said, his voice dangerously quiet, how Fleet Commander Rothak managed to lose 12 ships to a species that has barely learned to leave their home planet. Explain how 60 warships were defeated by 12 patrol craft and some orbital weapons platforms. The commanders around the circle remained silent. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Admiral Krenix, a tactical specialist who had studied the battle recordings, stood. Supreme Commander, the humans fought using methods we did not anticipate. They employed stealth technology we didn't know they possessed. They used kinetic weapons optimized to bypass our shields. They sacrificed their own ships in suicide attacks. And they demonstrated a willingness to take casualties that no rational species would accept. You're saying they're insane? Velkor asked. I'm saying they're desperate, Krenix replied. A desperate enemy is the most dangerous kind. They have nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Velkor studied the tactical analysis, his mind working through the problem. The Vorath Empire had not maintained its dominance for 5,000 years by underestimating enemies. Every species had strengths and weaknesses. The key was identifying them and exploiting them. What do we know about human military doctrine? Velkor asked. Krenix activated another display, showing compiled intelligence on human warfare. Humans have a long history of conflict on their homeworld. Their entire civilization was forged through constant warfare. They developed sophisticated military strategies over thousands of years, often fighting against superior numbers or technology. They excel at asymmetric warfare using terrain deception and unconventional tactics to overcome disadvantages. Their homeworld must be extremely dangerous to produce such a violent species, another commander observed. According to our xenobiologists, Krennic continued, Earth is classified as a Class 7 death world. The planet has extreme environmental variations, numerous predator species, deadly microorganisms, and frequent natural disasters. Humans evolved in an environment that constantly tried to kill them. It made them adaptable, resilient, and extremely aggressive when threatened. Velcor absorbed this information. Most council species came from relatively benign worlds where evolution had proceeded peacefully. The Vorath homeworld was harsh by most standards, which was one reason the Vorath had become such effective warriors. But a Class 7 death world? That was almost unheard of. Species from such planets rarely developed advanced civilizations because they were too busy surviving. So we're fighting a species that evolved in hell, Velcor said. That explains their tactics. It doesn't change the outcome. We will assemble a fleet large enough to overwhelm any defense they can mount. We will take these colonies, and we will teach humanity the price of defying the Vorath Empire. Supreme Commander, Krennic said carefully, there is another consideration. The Galactic Council is watching. Some species are questioning whether this campaign is justified. If we escalate too aggressively, we risk losing political support. Velcor's scales darkened. The Council voted in our favor. They authorized us to take these colonies. If some species are having second thoughts, that is their weakness, not ours. We will proceed with overwhelming force. Assemble 200 warships. Call in our allies. I want those colonies taken within 30 days. The orders went out across Vorath space. Shipyards accelerated production. Reserve fleets were activated. Allied species were contacted and asked to contribute ships to the campaign. The Vorath were preparing to crush humanity with such force that no one would ever dare defy them again. But while the Vorath assembled their fleet, humanity was not idle. On Earth, Admiral Vasquez gathered her top commanders for a strategy session. The holographic display showed human space, with particular focus on the 3 disputed colonies. Intelligence reports indicated the Vorath were preparing a much larger attack, potentially with 200 ships or more. We can't win a conventional battle, Vasquez said bluntly. They have more ships, bigger ships, better shields, and more experience. If we try to meet them head-on, we'll lose. Then we don't fight conventionally, said General Thomas Reeves, commander of Earth's Special Operations Forces. We fight the way humans have always fought when outnumbered. We use guerrilla tactics. We hit their supply lines. We make them afraid to operate in our space. Vasquez nodded. Exactly. We're going to turn this sector into a nightmare for the Vorath. Every ship they send here will be a target. Every supply convoy will be vulnerable. We're going to make this campaign so expensive that they'll question whether these colonies are worth the cost. That requires getting inside their decision loop, said Captain Sarah Mitchell, head of Naval Intelligence. We need to understand how they think, how they plan, what they value, and we need to attack those things. Over the next 2 weeks, Earth's military implemented a strategy that would have been familiar to resistance fighters throughout human history. They couldn't match the Vorath in open battle, so they would make the Vorath's superior numbers irrelevant. Special operations teams departed on fast, stealthy ships traveling through less monitored transit routes toward Vorath space. These teams consisted of humanity's most skilled soldiers, people who had trained for years in infiltration, sabotage, and asymmetric warfare. Each team had a specific target and complete autonomy to accomplish their mission. Team 7, led by Commander Jake Morrison, had perhaps the most ambitious mission. They were to infiltrate a major Vorath supply depot on a secondary colony world called Vorathis Minor. The depot provided fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to Vorath military fleets operating in that sector of space. Destroying it would cripple Vorath operations for months. Morrison and his 6-person team traveled aboard a civilian freighter, using forged documentation to pass through Vorath security checkpoints. The Vorath, confident in their superiority, had surprisingly lax internal security. They didn't believe any species would dare attack them on their own territory. That was their second mistake. The team reached Vorathis Minor and spent a week studying the supply depot. They identified patrol patterns, security protocols, and structural weaknesses. Morrison was a 20-year veteran of special operations, and he had learned that patience was more important than courage. You didn't rush into a mission. You waited for the perfect moment. That moment came during a shift change when security was briefly reduced. Morrison's team, dressed as Vorath civilian workers, entered the depot through a maintenance entrance. Their forged credentials passed the automated security checks. Inside, they split into 3 pairs, each heading to a different section of the massive facility. Morrison and his demolition specialist, a woman named Lieutenant Chen, made their way to the fuel storage area. Massive tanks held enough fuel to supply a fleet for months. Chen studied the tanks, calculating the best placement for their charges. "If we do this right," Chen whispered, "we can create a chain reaction that will take out the entire northern section." "And if we do it wrong?" Morrison asked. "We'll vaporize ourselves and probably half the colony. No pressure then." They placed their charges with care, using advanced explosives that humanity had developed specifically for this type of mission. The bombs were designed to create maximum damage with minimal warning. They would activate on a timer, giving the team time to escape. The other pairs completed their assignments. One team planted charges in the ammunition storage. Another sabotaged the facility's computer systems, introducing viruses that would spread through the Vorath military network. 20 minutes after entering, Morrison's team was heading back toward their extraction point. They had almost reached the exit when an alarm sounded. "A patrol had discovered something suspicious. Move," Morrison ordered. The team ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Vorath security forces converged on their position. Energy weapons fired, missing by inches. The team returned fire with human kinetic weapons, dropping 2 Vorath guards. They reached their extraction vehicle, a stolen transport that Chen had hot-wired earlier. The vehicle's engines roared to life and they accelerated toward the spaceport. Behind them, Vorath security vehicles gave chase. "Charges armed," Chen reported. "Detonation in 90 seconds. The transport dodged through traffic, weaving between civilian vehicles, causing chaos. Vorath pursuers followed, their larger vehicles struggling to match the smaller transport's maneuverability. Morrison gritted his teeth as energy blasts struck the transport's rear armor. They reached the spaceport and raced toward their ship, a modified fast courier designed for quick escapes. The team abandoned the transport and sprinted across the landing pad. Energy blasts struck all around them. One team member went down, hit in the leg. Morrison grabbed him and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the ship. 30 seconds, Chen shouted. They reached the ship and scrambled aboard. The engines were already warming up. Morrison threw himself into the pilot's seat and engaged full thrust, not even waiting for the airlock to fully close. The ship shot upward, acceleration crushing everyone against their seats. Vorath patrol ships were launching to intercept, but they were too slow. 10 seconds, Chen said. Morrison pointed the ship toward space and pushed the engines beyond safe limits. Behind them, Vorathis Minor's surface suddenly erupted in a massive explosion. The fuel depot detonated, and the shockwave spread across kilometers. The ammunition storage went next, adding to the destruction. Fires spread through the complex. Secondary explosions rippled outward. From orbit, Morrison watched the destruction through the ship's rear cameras. Approximately 30% of the Vorath military supply depot was gone. Fuel that was supposed to support their fleet for months was burning. Ammunition was destroyed. The computer systems were corrupted. Mission accomplished, Morrison said quietly. Similar operations were unfolding across Vorath space. Another team destroyed a communication relay, cutting off coordination between Vorath fleet groups. A third team assassinated a Vorath logistics coordinator, whose death threw supply chain management into chaos. A fourth team planted evidence suggesting that a Vorath allied species was actually working with humans, sowing seeds of distrust. These operations weren't just military actions. They were psychological warfare. Humanity was demonstrating that nowhere was safe, that the Vorath couldn't protect even their own territory, that fighting humans came with a price that extended far beyond the battlefield. The Galactic Council watched these developments with growing concern. In the council chambers, emergency sessions were called to discuss the escalating conflict. The humans are using terrorist tactics, Commander Zethis argued. They attack civilian infrastructure. They use sabotage and assassination. This is not honorable warfare. The Vorath attacked their colonies first, Ambassador Tillian countered. What did you expect? That they would form battle lines and fight according to Vorath traditions? Humans are fighting for survival. They will use whatever methods work. Other species joined the debate. Some supported the Vorath, arguing that the Council's authority was being challenged. Others questioned whether the Council had made the right decision in the first place. A few species, particularly younger ones who had experienced similar treatment from older, more powerful species, quietly began to sympathize with humanity. Chief Arbiter Crystallix attempted to maintain order, but the Council was dividing. The unity that had authorized military action against humanity was cracking. On Varathis Prime, Supreme Commander Velcor received reports of the attacks with mounting fury. His supply lines were disrupted. His coordination was compromised. The fleet he was assembling to crush humanity was now dealing with logistical problems that delayed the campaign. "Find these human saboteurs," Velcor ordered. "I want them hunted down and eliminated." But finding them was proving impossible. Humans were spread across Vorath space, hiding among civilian populations using stealth technology, operating in small teams that were nearly impossible to track. For every team the Vorath caught, 2 more escaped, and the attacks continued. Admiral Krenix entered Velcor's office carrying a datapad. His scales were pale, a sign of stress among the Vorath. "Supreme Commander, I have new intelligence about the human military. Our analysts have discovered something disturbing." Velcor took the datapad and read the report. His eyes widened slightly. "They've been planning this," Velcor said slowly. "These attacks aren't desperate improvisation. They prepared for this scenario. They studied us, learned our weaknesses, developed specific tactics to exploit them." "Yes, Supreme Commander. The humans apparently have a military doctrine called asymmetric warfare. They developed it on their homeworld, refining it over thousands of years. They fought countless wars against superior enemies and learned how to win anyway. What we're experiencing now is the application of those principles." Velcor set down the datapad and stared at the wall, thinking. The Vorath had always relied on superior numbers and technology. They expected enemies to fight conventionally, to meet force with force. Humans were doing something different. They were fighting smart instead of fighting fair. "We need to adapt," Velcor said. "If the humans won't fight conventionally, we'll force them to. Accelerate the fleet assembly. I want 200 ships ready in 10 days. We'll hit all 3 colonies simultaneously with overwhelming force. We'll make the cost of resistance so high that even these stubborn humans will have to surrender." The orders went out. The Vorath fleet, the largest assembled in a generation, began moving toward human space. 200 warships supported by dozens of supply vessels and troop ships. This time the Vorath wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating their enemy. This time they would bring such power that no amount of clever tactics could save humanity. On Earth, Admiral Vasquez watched the intelligence reports showing the Vorath fleet's movement. 200 ships. It was more than she had hoped for, actually. Every Vorath ship committed to this campaign was a ship that couldn't be used elsewhere. The Vorath were concentrating their forces, which meant they were leaving other areas vulnerable. "Send the signal to our deep cover teams," Vasquez ordered. "Target the facilities and assets they left behind. Make them pay for every ship they send against us." The strategy was brutal but effective. While the Vorath concentrated on taking 3 colonies, humanity would make them lose far more across the rest of their territory. Every Vorath ship sent to human space was a ship that wasn't protecting Vorath infrastructure. Every commander focused on humanity was a commander who wasn't watching for other threats. Humanity was teaching the galaxy a lesson that humans,